Atlantis, real or ideal? Legend, myth and mystery, or hidden and missing history? For over 2,000 years mankind has grappled with the question, what was Atlantis? From great sea power of ancient times to idealistic utopia, from pawn of Nazi propaganda to home of the ancient aliens, the full weight of human imagination has been brought to bear on the mystery that is Atlantis. Who do we believe? What is the evidence? Where did it all begin? Where and when will it end? It's time to break apart the myth and reveal the hard evidence and discover Atlantis. So what does the word itself mean, and where did it originate? Two small dialogues called Timaeus and Critias, written by the Greek philosopher Plato in around 360 BC, first mention Atlantis. It is named after the Greek Titan god Atlas, who holds up the world on his shoulders. Atlantis is the island and there was an island situated in front of the straits, which are by you called the Pillars of Heracles. The island was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and was the way of other islands, and from these you might pass to the whole of the opposite continent which surrounded the true ocean. For this sea, which is within the straits of Heracles, is only a harbour, having a narrow entrance, but that other is a real sea, and the surrounding land may be most truly called a boundless continent. Now in this island of Atlantis there was a great and powerful empire, which had rule over the whole island and several others, and over parts of the continent, and, furthermore, the men of Atlantis had subjected the parts of Libya within the columns of Heracles as far as Egypt, and of Europe as far as Tyrrhenia. This vast power gathered into one, endeavoured to subdue at a blow our country and yours, and the whole of the region within the straits. And then, Solon, your country shone forth, and in the excellence of her virtue and strength among all mankind. She was preeminent in courage and military skill, and was the leader of the Hellenes. And when the rest fell off from her, being compelled to stand alone, after having undergone the very extremity of danger, she defeated and triumphed over the invaders, and preserved from slavery those who were not yet subjugated, and generously liberated all the rest of us who dwell within the pillars. But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared into the depths of the sea. For which reason the sea in those parts is impassable and impenetrable, because there is a shoal of mud in the way, and this was caused by the subsidence of the island. According to Plato, Atlantis was a great land and sea power, situated in front of the Pillars of Hercules. This great power had existed 9,000 years before Plato. That's about 11,000 years ago. It had conquered much of Europe and Africa. However, when they attempted to invade Athens, the island sank into the ocean in a single day and night of misfortune. From the moment Plato put pen to paper, Atlantis became a mystery of debate on all levels. From the idea that it actually existed to the concept of it being a utopian dream. To academics, the tale is one of many myths, woven into Plato's works for purely stylistic reasons. He was conceptualizing that ideal state, just as he did so in the Republic. He introduces Atlantis via an older story to give it credence. In Cayce, Plato tells the tale of Solon visiting Egypt. There he met a priest called Cayce, who relayed the story of a war between the ancient Athens and Atlantis. Some say that real events may have influenced Plato, such as the eruption of Santorini, the invasion of the Sea Peoples, and even the Trojan War. Most, however, insist that Plato created the story with minor inspirations such as the failed Athenian invasion of Sicily. Plato introduced Atlantis first in Timaeus. For it is related in our records how once upon a time your state stayed the course of a mighty host, which, starting from a distant point in the Atlantic Ocean, was insolently advancing to attack the whole of Europe and Asia to boot. For the ocean there was at that time navigable, for in front of the mouth which you Greeks call, as you say, the Pillars of Heracles, there lay an island which was larger than Libya and Asia put together, and it was possible for the travellers of that time to cross from it to the other islands, and from the islands to the whole of the continent over against them, which encompasses that veritable ocean. For all that we have here, lying within the mouth of which we speak, is evidently a haven having a narrow entrance. But that yonder is a real ocean, and the land surrounding it may most rightly be called, in the fullest and truest sense, a continent. Now in this island of Atlantis there existed a confederation of kings, of great and marvellous power, which held sway over all the island, and over many other islands also, and parts of the continent. Timaeus begins with the creation and structure of the universe as seen by Plato. He discusses ancient civilizations and muses about the ideal society. He asks whether his friends might know of any such place. Cayce answers that he knows of a supposedly historical place and events that surround it. In this record, Athens is the perfect state, with Atlantis in opposition, it being the opposite of perfect. Cayce states that the gods divided the land amongst themselves, and Poseidon, the god of the sea, was given Atlantis. Larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined, it was in this tale to be sunk by an earthquake, turning into an impassable muddy shoal. The Egyptians, he said, described Atlantis as having mountains in the north, being hundreds of miles across, made up of numerous islands, with the central island being around half a mile in diameter. It is probably important to understand the layout and description of the islands of Atlantis, because one thing is certain: Plato would never include such details on a whim. Like many other myths, the details could point to a real location, such as in the case of Troy, or refer to something like sacred geometry. Looking at the other parts of the tale may reveal a clue. Docks were carved directly into the massive rocks. Each entrance had gates and towers, and walls surrounded each ring made from red, white and black rocks. These were covered in brass, tin and orichalcum. Each of these things have symbolic meaning. Red, for instance, was a symbol of growth and decay. Orichalcum is an unknown metal used for armour. There is an earlier account of Atlantis, written by Hellenicus of Lesbos. There is very little in the fragment that exists, and this deals mainly with genealogy. The writer Proclus also said, "We must bear in mind concerning this whole feat of the Athenians, that it is neither a mere myth nor unadorned history, although some take it as history and others as myth. That an island of such nature and size once existed is evident from what is said by certain authors who investigated the things around the outer sea. For according to them, there were 7 islands in that sea in their time, sacred to Persephone, and also 3 others of enormous size, one of which was sacred to Hades, another to Ammon, and another one between them to Poseidon, the extent of which was 1,000 stadia, and the inhabitants of which, they add, preserved the remembrance from their ancestors of the immeasurably large island of Atlantis, which had really existed there, and for which many ages had reigned over all islands in the Atlantic Sea, and which itself had likewise been sacred to Poseidon." Proclus was not alone in believing Atlantis to be real. So too did the historians and philosophers Strabo and Posidonius. A few decades after Plato, another writer by the name of Theopompus spoke of a land called Meropis. Here, a race of men grew twice the size of normal men, and inhabited two cities known as Eusebes and Machismos, the pious town and the fighting town. Most scholars believe that Theopompus was in fact imitating or copying Plato, and thus much of the detail has merged with the mythology of Atlantis. The next actual written work about Atlantis comes from the historian Philo in the 1st century AD. He claims that the successor of Aristotle, a man named Theophrastus, said, "And the island of Atlantis, which was greater than Africa and Asia, as Plato says in the Timaeus, in one day and night was overwhelmed beneath the sea in consequence of an extraordinary earthquake and inundation, and suddenly disappeared, becoming sea, not indeed navigable, but full of gulfs and eddies." The Christian writer Tertullian said that Atlantis was real, and that was of equal size to Libya and Asia, showing that he was familiar with Plato's description. Another Christian, Arnobius, said the destruction of Atlantis was due to their pagan ways. Cosmas in the 6th century wrote, "There is to westward an island, Atlantis, lying out in the ocean, in the direction of Cadiz, of an enormous magnitude, and relates that the 10 kings, having procured mercenaries from the nations in this island, came from the earth far away, and conquered Europe and Asia, but were afterwards conquered by the Athenians, while that island itself was submerged by God under the sea." But Plato and Aristotle praised this philosopher, and Proclus, who has written a commentary on him. He himself expresses views similar to our own, with some modifications, transferring the scene of the events from the east to the west. Moreover, he mentions those 10 generations as well as that earth which lies beyond the ocean. And in a word, it is evident that all of them borrow from Moses and publish his statements as their own. It is interesting that Atlantis was being compared with the Great Flood from the Bible, a sudden destruction of populations way back in antiquity, and only remembered now as legend. Scientific evidence does show floods around the globe at various times, and some have compared the tsunamis caused by the eruption of Santorini to the biblical flood. In truth, it may be that other cultures wrote of this massive destruction of an entire civilization, but with different names and perspectives. A Hebrew text from the 14th century discussing calculations for longitude states, "Some say that they begin at the beginning of the Western Ocean and beyond, for in the earliest times there was an island in the middle of the ocean. There were scholars there who isolated themselves in the pursuit of philosophy. In their day, that was the beginning for measuring the longitude of the inhabited world. Today, it has become covered by sea." From the 16th century onwards, speculations surrounding Atlantis spread, and with new European discoveries in the Americas and elsewhere, there was good reason to suggest there might just be traces of those great islands somewhere. It was in this era of speculation that Sir Thomas More first uttered the name Utopia. It was a work inspired directly by the tales of Atlantis and accounts from travellers to far-off lands. This utopia was situated in the New World, and indeed inspired many people to venture across the Atlantic themselves. Plato's description of a massive continent mirrored the size and scope of the New World of the Americas. Sir Francis Bacon continued this theme in his work The New Atlantis, where his idealistic paradise was situated off the western coast of America. It was becoming popular belief that Atlantis had indeed been based upon stories of the Mayans and Aztec civilizations. It was an era of grand Christianity, and evidence for many of the Old Testament tales was being sought out. Europeans saw most indigenous peoples as inferior and comforted themselves with the notions that white men had built the massive structures that were being found. A common history between the tribes of Israel and Europeans to those people who must have built such pyramids and palaces. This was all being brought into line with the concepts of Atlantis and gave them a satisfying explanation. By the mid-19th century, Mesoamerican scholars were proposing officially that Atlantis must relate to the Mayan and Aztec cultures. It was stated that the Toltecs were the surviving remnant of the Atlanteans, and the Aztecs descended from these. Such ideas, along with romantic drawings, fostered the popular imagination, and soon a mixture of Egyptian, Greek, Mayan and Aztec imagery was being created for a fantasy world around the legend of Atlantis. It is difficult today to understand the credence that was given to such thoughts. We have modern science, geological surveys, archaeological digs, post-Rosetta Stone translations of major historical texts, a broad and yet fairly detailed account of much of history. Back in the 19th and early 20th century, scholars were still developing the science of historical research, and this included using a lot of imagination to fill in the gaps. One man who successfully used his imagination and strong willpower to unlock an age-old mystery was Heinrich Schliemann. Ever since Homer had written down the story of Troy, mankind had wondered how much of it was true. When Schliemann discovered Troy in modern-day Turkey, which was believed to have been legend, the fire once again ignited for Atlantis. Scholars claim to have discovered a connection between the Greek and Mayan languages, and suddenly the game was open for all to play. The writer Ignatius Donnelly tried to prove that all known civilizations were descended from Atlantis. He drew parallels between the creation stories of various cultures and stated that the true Garden of Eden was really in Atlantis. It was Donnelly who inspired a 19th century Atlantis revival and began a march towards New Age concepts of the ancients. The world was about to be given a whole new interpretation of the Atlantis myth, and an array of fanciful and bizarre concepts would merge into the popular psyche. The Theosophical Society would take it all, mould it, and repackage it in The Secret Doctrine by Madame Blavatsky. The book, she claimed, had been originally dictated in Atlantis itself. In the book, Blavatsky completely ignored Plato's statement that Atlantis was the opposite of pure and good. Instead, she described them as cultural heroes. They were part of what she called a root race, succeeded by her own Aryan race. The Theosophists claimed that Atlantis reached its peak of civilization around 1 million years ago, when it finally destroyed itself through the dangerous use of psychic and supernatural powers. There is absolutely no evidence for any of the claims, other than their own self-professed psychic abilities to communicate with the Atlanteans. The merging of myths and the retelling of the Atlantis legend would eventually provide the Nazis with one of the pretenses for their Aryan philosophy, which resulted in mass genocide. In 1934, Julius Evola claimed that the Atlanteans were Nordic supermen who had originally come from the North Pole, and others followed suit. Then there comes Edgar Cayce. He was a Kentuckian who claimed to have psychic powers and the ability to foretell the future and heal the sick. During his moments of insight, he would reveal that many of his followers were in fact reborn Atlanteans, and by tapping into their collective unconsciousness, he could describe what Atlantis had been like. Disappointingly, one of his predictions failed to come true, that Atlantis would rise from its watery grave in the 1960s. Nevertheless, Cayce, even after his death, still has thousands of followers who still search for the Hall of Records, supposedly buried beneath the Sphinx in Egypt, and upon which are written the secrets of Atlantis. This creative surge surrounding Atlantis is now in the popular psyche. People see it as a home of advanced technology, of superhuman abilities, of perfection. Powerful energy crystals and mysterious magical ways pushed aside any concepts of a real city-state inhabited by real people. During the course of the 1960s and beyond, modern understanding of plate tectonics and continental drift has eroded such New Age philosophies, and science took over. Today, most scholars see the story of Atlantis as a method of teaching. Breaking down Plato's writing methods and Greek storytelling reveals that he was in fact asking us to examine our own culture, politics and government. We have missed the point, they say, if we go off around the world attempting to discover the lost continent. Others still point to Schliemann and how he actually found a city of legend from Greek myth. Remnants of the New Age creations linger in films and TV shows, on numerous websites full of conspiracy theories and aliens, and in dozens of speculative books. But the mainstream scholar has, on the whole, come to terms with the fact that Atlantis, as stated by Plato, never really existed. But there are those, like Schliemann, who remain outside of the mainstream and still search, and every few years a new theory emerges, and some of these even make it onto our TV screens with bold claims to have discovered the real Atlantis. So where should we look? Where is this ancient place? Is it in the realm of thought and philosophy? Or is there a possibility that it might have once existed, like Troy? There literally are dozens of hypothetical locations put forward by modern-day explorers. Some completely ignore Plato's words and don't even look to the Atlantic Ocean. A lot of the locations have similarities to the Atlantis tale, such as a catastrophic end, waterways, and existed close to the time frame. Most of the proposed locations fall within the Mediterranean Sea. Sardinia, Crete, Sicily, Cyprus, Malta, and the most popular one, Santorini. There are also ancient cities that come under the spotlight, such as Troy and Tantalus. Our first port of call is the most popular, Santorini. Located in the Aegean, it is today known as Thera. Many experts claim that it was once the home of an ancient Minoan civilizations from Crete. Seen as a wise and cultivated society, it is easy to understand how they may have been seen as Atlanteans. Like the people of Atlantis, the Minoans worshipped the bull, and this has been used to link them together. But the problem remains that many cultures of the period, such as the Egyptians, worshipped the bull as well. In around the 16th century BC, Santorini erupted, destroying the society completely. It caused a massive tsunami that also destroyed the Minoan society on Crete and spread disaster far and wide, with flooding as far as Egypt. It is speculated that this disaster influenced Plato in his storytelling. But it is thousands of years too late for it to be Atlantis. However, some have argued that Plato meant 900 years and not 9,000, and that this was an error in translation. This would also make Crete roughly the same size as Atlantis, and Crete too is a possible contender. Further afield, the Bosporus and Ancona in the Black Sea have been suggested, but with very little acceptance. Speculation, New Age psychic ideas, Nazi propaganda, treasure hunters and more, and yet nobody has found the real hard evidence. television team working under Professor Richard Freund actually claimed to have found evidence for Atlantis in Andalusia. It was their belief that Atlantis had been destroyed by a tsunami in the area previously discovered by Spanish scientists. The team used satellite imagery of a suspected submerged city north of Cadiz and found what they believed to be a multi-ringed ancient dominion. They claimed that citizens of Atlantis fled to other cities and locations close by. However, Spanish scientists have completely dismissed the speculations, calling the claims fanciful. It has yet to be proven beyond doubt to be the location for Atlantis. The team were not alone in their claim, however. German researchers and historians have also stated the area to be a likely location. The claims centre around a place called Tartessus, which was said to have been a basis for Plato's work on Atlantis by some historians in the 1920s. The writer Herodotus stated that it was situated beyond the Pillars of Hercules, a statement Plato also used for Atlantis. They traded widely and seemed to have been wealthy. A local port was built, now known as Cadiz, and yet, apart from the good professor, no other scholars accept the claims. Many look beyond the Pillars of Hercules, now known as the Straits of Gibraltar, and into the Atlantic Ocean. It has been claimed that Atlantis was a northern European sunken island, such as Doggerland or Bergen Island, which was flooded by a tsunami in around 6100 BC. Others have claimed Ireland to be Atlantis, with its mysterious history of mighty warriors. The Canary and Madeira Islands have also been claimed due to their location just beyond the Mediterranean, but no evidence has been forthcoming. Various studies on the islands, including the Azores and beneath ocean waves, have resulted in a complete lack of evidence. Several other locations have been speculated upon: Antarctica, the Caribbean, an island near Cuba, the Bahamas, and South America. None of them have come anywhere near the amount of evidence required to prove beyond doubt that they are indeed Atlantis. There are a number of more modern claims that we must look at, such as the idea that Atlantis had something to do with ancient aliens. Before we do, it's time to take a look at a few of the problems with the original text from Plato. Doing so will help us to be clear-sighted when listening to the claims of aliens and such. Atlantis is said to be beyond the Pillars of Hercules or modern-day Gibraltar, and the sea is said to be impassable. Unfortunately, nowhere in any historical texts is this stated. The sea has always been fine for shipping. Atlantis is said to have sunk. So does this rule out any islands that are now viewable above the waves? Plato said his knowledge came from Solon, who himself learned it from the Egyptians. For well over 100 years, archaeologists and historians have been researching Egypt. They have a lot of knowledge and can even tell us what a particular pharaoh ate for dinner, and yet not one mention of Atlantis. As there is no scientific backing for channeled messages, we have to rule out anything from those who use them, including Edgar Cayce and Madame Blavatsky. This destroys such claims of tall, highly intelligent people who glow or have psychic powers. If they did indeed exist, then there would be a lot more historical and archaeological evidence for them, and Plato might have found such powers interesting enough to include in his tale. What Plato did tell us is clear. Atlantis was huge, made up of concentric rings of land and water, and situated beyond Gibraltar. There is no argument with those statements, and yet no sunken domain the size of 2 countries has been spotted beneath the waves of the Atlantic yet. Modern satellite technology and geographical surveys have revealed the floor of the Atlantic, as can be seen on Google Earth, and such a massive and unusual shape would have been spotted. One of the most used claims that is completely false is that the Atlanteans were technologically advanced. Plato mentions nothing of the sort. These are all from psychics and New Age philosophers speculating or channeling. There are no mentions of flying machines, psychic powers, pyramids, lasers, or any other kind of science fiction. Again, if such things had existed 11,000 years ago, then other cultures and trading partners would have mentioned them. The Egyptians certainly would. It makes for great entertainment and has indeed fed such wonderful television shows such as Stargate, but it remains science fiction. Many of these early writers who made fanciful claims for Atlantis were racially oriented, claiming that Mayans and Aztecs were not capable of creating their own pyramids and grand structures. Science moved forward and evidence overcame such bigotry. Today, similar claims are made, but instead of white Europeans or clever Egyptians being the mind behind the mystery, it is said that the knowledge came from aliens. However we dress it up, it is still racist and bigoted to assume ancient people could not build large structures without outside intervention. And yet, that is precisely what is being stated on hundreds of websites and in dozens of New Age books. Atlantis was created by ancient aliens who came here, spawned humanity, taught us, and for one reason or another were eventually wiped out or left. In the same breath, these people claim the pyramids of Egypt are in fact 500,000 years old and were wrapped in a protective substance for millennia. This, they claim, is the reason that so many similarities exist around the world in structures, language, and belief systems. What they neglect to remember is that mankind spread around the globe from the same source, that the sun, moon, and stars in the sky as deities were seen by all men. All mankind had the same needs, the same evolutionary drives, the same desire to meet their gods in the afterlife. Similarities around the globe are all easily explained through the similarities in the biological entity called human and the environment in which he lives. And this brings us to a very important point. Plato, when writing his Republic or texts about Atlantis, was passing on a message to us all about good and bad, right and wrong, about ways to set up a strong society that understands the nature of man. So many rules and regulations are created by humans that forget the nature of the beast. Atlantis and its downfall is an allegory of what comes to all those who believe they are more than they are. Plato was a teacher of men. Not all that is taught is literal fact. Some teaching is better done through fables. It has always been this way. The problem arises when we start to believe a man really walks on water and a virgin lady gave birth. The same can be said of Atlantis in many respects. Do we believe the writings of a man who claimed psychic connection to the souls of Atlantis? Do we accept they had incredible technology, crystals of power, came thousands of years ago in a spaceship, spawned mankind, and on? Or do we look at what was written, the surrounding archaeological discoveries from the period, the contemporary writings, in short, the facts? Hundreds of lives have been spent hunting for the lost city, island, or continent of Atlantis. Some have deluded themselves, some truly believed, and some attempted to delude others. So, if we understand that Plato was creating a story for the purpose of teaching, could it be that there was some kind of real story upon which it was based? Ignoring the timeline of 11,000 years ago, was there a series of events that Plato stole for his teaching device? The answer is, maybe. In the 5th century BC, there existed a delicate balance of power between Athens and Sparta, much like that stated between Athens and Atlantis by Plato. A surprise earthquake struck Sparta, killing more than 20,000 of them. This demise in numbers made Sparta's neighbours, and indeed subjects, to begin what is known as the Earthquake Wars. Sparta refused aid from Athens, and hostilities between them began. In 426 BC, one of the most destructive earthquakes from antiquity struck Athens, with the following tsunamis causing chaos. The Spartan army was camped nearby and ready to attack, but more earthquakes forced them to flee. An island called Atlantis was the home to an Athenian fort. Absolute chaotic destruction came in the form of a massive sea wave. There were many deaths, and the coastline was changed forever. In the 4th century BC, a peace treaty was finally struck, but was quickly followed by yet another earthquake, destroying the cities of Helice and Burra. Helice had been a wealthy city and capital of a league of city-states. It had been a centre for the worship of Poseidon and was revered by many. It was a relatively peaceful civilization and inspired many to see it as a perfect society. The destructive power of the earthquake and the following tsunami destroyed every building, and Pausanias wrote that even the foundations were lost for all time. Following the disaster, the remnants of this once glorious city were divided amongst its neighbours. Eventually, legend emerged that Poseidon himself had caused the destruction for the defiling of his sanctuary. writers started to say that Helix remains now lie deep beneath the ocean floor. It was into this very period that Plato was born, and all the news and discussion of the events would have been widespread. Looking at the various real historical events in the area just before and at the time of Plato, it is clear to see where he gained his inspiration of political perfection and ultimate demise. And yet, with every passing decade, a new discovery emerges of ancient structures on the ocean floor. Pyramids, great walls, strange man-made objects seem to be everywhere. Who knows? One day, we may just discover the remnants of that ancient civilization called Atlantis. In each age, the story has undergone a metamorphosis. From Greek deities to sacred spirits of some unseen realm, from Nazi propaganda to little green men, Atlantis will continue to be a mirror to society, and in many ways it points us towards the beginning of civilization itself.